Hi Biology, so today we're going to go ahead and start talking about human genetics. That's chapter 11.1. Okay, so this picture that you see right here, hopefully you already know, is called a karyotype. And a karyotype is basically a picture of all of our chromosomes. And we line them up from largest to smallest. And we always put the sex chromosomes at the very end. Okay, so you can see there was an X and a Y at the end. So karyotypes can tell us a bunch of different things. They can tell us if we're missing or we have extra chromosomes. So we can see here there's an extra 21st chromosome, and that would signify Down syndrome. They can tell us the gender. So remember, always look towards the end of the karyotype to see whether you have an XX or an XY. We can also see some deletions and insertions. So if you remember, a deletion is any time like a part of a chromosome is deleted. Insertion is when part of a chromosome is added. Last but not least, because we're only seeing the chromosomes in large, we can't really see any gene mutation. So chromosomes that determine the sex of an organism, we obviously call our sex chromosomes. All other chromosomes are called autosomes. So humans have two sex chromosomes. They have an XX or they have an XY, and they have 44 autosomes. Sex can be determined by if you have an XX, you're a female, and you can see that in this pedigree here of a normal female, that two X chromosomes are at the end. Males will have the XY, and again you can see that at the bottom pedigree where the male has a large X chromosome and that smaller Y chromosome. So who decides the sex of a baby? Mom can only give an X chromosome and dad can either give an X or a Y. So if we were to do a Punnett square here, you would see that obviously mom's giving her X's, dad's giving the X's as well, but he can also then give that Y. So at the end of the day, dad is the one that determines the sex of the baby. So if he gives an X with mom's X, you get a girl. If he gives his Y with mom's Y or X, you get a boy. Human genetics is going to be very similar to what we already learned. So we have dominant recessive relationships. We have homozygous versus heterozygous. We see that we do get a little bit more complicated because obviously we're more complex than pea plant. And we'll talk about that later, but here's some examples. So a gene known as MC1R helps determine the skin color and skin and hair color of a person. An individual that has red hair usually has two recessive alleles for that gene, and the dominant alleles for the MC1R gene help produce darker hair colors. So that's an example of complete dominance. Something's completely dominant over something else. We also see codominant and multiple allele traits. So for instance, we have the ABO blood types is an example. We've talked about this already. It's determined by a gene with 3 alleles. So that's your example of multiple allele trait. Alleles A and B are also both can be expressed. And if they're both expressed, they're said to be codominant. So if you see both of them, then you're obviously codominant. So sex chromosomes can carry other genes, and we call those sex-linked traits, which again we've talked about before. These traits show up in different percentages in males and females because they move along with the sex chromosomes. So we have Y-linked genes. Y-linked genes are genes that we find on the Y chromosome. That's kind of like a duh thing. And an example of that is hairy peanut, and that just means hairy ears. So you don't really see a lot of women walking around with super hairy ears. That, I mean, kind of gross in both ways, but I mean, you just don't see women that way. So it's Y-linked genes only show up in males, and that makes sense. It's on the Y chromosome. We also see an X-linked recessive disorder, so you have to have both recessive alleles to see the disorder, are more frequent in males than in females because males only have one X chromosome. So here's an example. So why this happens. Men either only have one X chromosome, they have the other one is a Y. So they don't have traits on the Y chromosome that the X chromosome has. So if they have the defective gene, they're going to express it. If they have the normal gene, they're going to express it because there's nothing to mask the defective. Women, on the other hand, have 2 X chromosomes. So they're going to have 2 alleles for that one single trait. So if they have the normal gene and the defective gene, so they're heterozygotes, that normal gene will mask the dominant, or will mask the recessive defective gene. So females need 2 recessive alleles in order to have the trait. So the X chromosome in males fly without a co-pilot. Last but not least, we're going to talk about pedigrees. Now, pedigrees are diagrams that show how genes are passed on several generations. So in a pedigree, you're going to see different things, and you should know how to draw a pedigree chart. We're also going to practice. What I want to talk about is basically women are designated with a circle, men are designated with a square. Then if there's a marriage between those two individuals, you're going to draw a horizontal line between the male and the female. Then we have lines that branch off those horizontal lines. The bracket mean that those individuals had children. Then if you see individuals that are shaded in versus not shaded in, the individuals that are shaded in are the ones that actually have the trait. Those that aren't shaded in don't have the trait.